At a high-end bank in the heart of Chicago, a casually dressed black man, wearing a simple shirt and khaki pants, walks gently through the sleek glass door to make a routine withdrawal. But as soon as he approaches the counter, the friendly smile of the female teller immediately fades, replaced by a look of suspicion and a cold attitude. Just minutes later, security is called, and he is dragged out of the bank in disgrace, while the other white customers walk out with stacks of cash without any questioning. What the bank doesn't know is that they just wrongly kicked out the wrong person, because when his true identity is revealed, the bank's CEO will show them exactly who holds the real power here. The automatic glass doors open softly, revealing a black man entering with a confident yet humble demeanor. He is not a businessman in a sharp suit or high-end leather shoes like the regular customers here. Instead, he wears a simple light blue shirt, neatly pressed, beige khaki pants, and fresh, clean white sneakers. This appearance stands in stark contrast to the opulence and intricacy of the bank's interior, which he himself founded. This is Michael Barrett, CEO of Barrett Financial. A man of great power and success, but today, he intentionally appears in the most ordinary, humble form possible. No bodyguards, no assistants, no aura of a corporate tycoon. Michael blends into the crowd waiting for service, standing quietly, his sharp eyes observing everything around him. A young customer service representative greets each customer with a friendly smile, nodding gently and offering polite smiles. Michael watches the young man, satisfied to see the professionalism he always expects from his team. In the distance, a group of wealthy customers sits waiting in the plush leather seating area, speaking quietly, with steaming cups of coffee on the glass tables. Everything seems perfect, too peaceful. However, Michael isn't here today to conduct a surprise inspection or attend an important meeting. He simply needs to make a routine personal transaction, a small cash withdrawal, something any other customer could easily do without hesitation. With $15,000, Michael is certain the process will go smoothly and quickly, just like any other day. Yet, there is something in the air today that makes him feel inexplicably uneasy. A familiar feeling he can't quite describe, like he's about to witness something that will deeply disappoint him about the very place he worked so hard to build. Michael takes a deep breath, steps further into the bank, mentally preparing himself for whatever may come next. As Michael's gaze swept across the bank once more, it suddenly stopped at a customer standing at the main counter. The man, probably in his 50s, white, with graying hair, and dressed in a sharp gray suit, was smiling gently, completely at ease as he received stacks of cash from the young female teller across from him. Michael's attention shifted to the small, shiny brass nameplate on the employee's chest, Ashley Collins. Ashley's face was radiant, her friendly smile clearly evident as she placed the thick, neatly stacked bills on the counter for the customer. Michael didn't mean to, but he caught a glimpse of the large figure on the transaction slip that was placed down. $20,000. A substantial transaction. Yet it went through so easily that it was almost surprising. No questions, no suspicious glances. The customer, who Michael overheard the staff call James Walton, didn't even need to show ID or provide any further explanation. Michael watched James Walton's back as he left the counter and casually walked toward the door, his demeanor as relaxed as if he'd just finished a morning coffee. Michael's eyes lingered, a hint of concern crossing his face. As the founder of this bank, he was well versed in the stringent security and verification processes required for large cash withdrawals. But here, it seemed none of that had taken place. A subtle sense of unease brushed against his heart. Michael had been through enough to recognize this small but significant difference, one that carried deeper, unspoken meaning. He told himself it could just be a coincidence. Maybe this was a regular customer of Ashley's, but his intuition and years of experience whispered otherwise. Maintaining his usual calm demeanor, Michael made his way toward Ashley's counter. She was focused on her computer screen, still holding on to the cheerful, satisfied look from the previous transaction. But as soon as Michael stopped in front of her, that expression vanished. Ashley's eyes lifted to meet his, and the warm smile was quickly replaced with an inexplicable coldness. In that moment, Michael understood that his unease was not unfounded. It seemed Ashley had already made a decision, even before he had a chance to speak. Michael Barrett, the founder of Barrett Financial, had suddenly become a special customer in a way he never expected. The moment Ashley's eyes met Michael's, all traces of warmth vanished from her face, replaced by a coldness that was almost uncomfortable. Her blue eyes looked at him indifferently, as if he were a complete stranger unworthy of any attention. Michael maintained his calm demeanor, offering a slight nod as a polite greeting, as he would to any regular customer, but Ashley didn't even respond with the bare minimum of courtesy. Instead, she coldly bent down to the desk drawer, pulled out a transaction slip, slammed it down onto the counter, and pushed it toward him with her glossy, pale, pink-painted fingernails. "Fill this out," Ashley's voice rang out, sharp and curt, without a single polite word or friendly glance. The stark contrast between how she had behaved with James Walton and the way she was treating Michael made his frustration slowly rise within him. Michael took the pen placed beside him, quietly bent down to fill out the transaction form. Still, out of the corner of his eye, he kept an eye on Ashley. The young employee didn't even bother to look at him once, absent-mindedly fiddling with the silver bracelet on her wrist, her face showing clear impatience, as if this transaction was an enormous inconvenience to her. As he filled out the necessary details, Michael softly asked, trying to keep his voice steady, "Quite a busy day for the bank, isn't it?" But all he got in return was cold silence. Ashley didn't answer, not even bothering to look up. This indifferent, unprofessional attitude not only disappointed Michael, but also made him feel hurt. However, he controlled his emotions, finished filling out the form clearly, and slowly placed it back in front of Ashley. "I'll withdraw $15,000, Michael stated, clearly and distinctly. Only then did Ashley reluctantly glance down at the form, her eyes skimming the amount before looking up at him with a furrowed brow and a suspicious expression. Her gaze was not just unfriendly, but held an inexplicable distrust. Michael Barrett, a man who had faced countless challenges and hardships in his life, recognized clearly what was happening. A subtle, covert, but cruel form of discrimination was unfolding in every glance and every small, calculated gesture from the young teller named Ashley Collins. The cold atmosphere that Ashley had created became even more apparent as she picked up the form, frowning slightly as if she had read something unusual. Her cold blue eyes turned back to Michael, this time clearly showing suspicion mixed with discomfort. "Sorry, our bank doesn't handle large cash withdrawals like this." Ashley's voice came out decisively, without a hint of remorse, as though this was something Michael should have known beforehand. Michael was briefly taken aback, but he quickly regained his composure. He knew better than anyone that a $15,000 withdrawal was entirely normal, especially considering he had just witnessed James Walton leave the bank with an even larger sum without any issues. Michael took a deep, calming breath, trying to keep his tone polite and composed. "I understand the bank's policy, but I just saw the customer before me, the man named James Walton, withdraw a much larger sum without any problems. I'm sure I'm not mistaken." Ashley appeared momentarily flustered, her eyes blinking once, before she immediately returned to her cold, rigid demeanor. Without the slightest hesitation, Ashley smirked slightly and responded with a tone that was almost provocative. "That's a different matter." That short, icy response felt like a bucket of cold water splashed directly in Michael's face, forcing him to sharply focus on the nature of the issue. A different matter, Michael thought to himself. A clever way Ashley used to avoid explaining what was really going through her mind. It was clear discrimination, something he had always hoped would never happen at Barrett Financial, the very bank he had built with all his heart and soul. In that moment, Michael stared deeply into Ashley's indifferent blue eyes, searching for some sign of reason, some hint of goodwill, or at least a trace of embarrassment that might suggest this was all a misunderstanding. But no, everything he saw was pure coldness and the arrogant confidence of someone who knew they held control over the situation. Michael felt a sharp, painful realization. He was facing something he had spent his whole life trying to eradicate. Subtle, persistent racism, cleverly concealed under polite but chilling words. And he knew, right at this moment, that it was happening in the one place he never expected, in the very bank he had founded. At that moment, as if sensing the tension building, a figure stepped out from the office at the end of the hallway, exuding power and arrogance. It was Patricia Morgan, the branch manager of Barrett Financial, a white woman in her 40s, with a slender frame and smooth golden blonde hair neatly tied up. The expensive black suit she wore only enhanced her air of authority and coldness, the demeanor of someone accustomed to controlling every situation around her. Patricia stopped at a distance, far enough not to directly involve herself in the exchange, but close enough to observe every gesture and expression of Michael clearly. Her sharp, almost indifferent gaze quickly flicked toward Ashley, silently exchanging information through a brief but loaded look. Just a slight nod, quick, discreet, from Patricia was enough for Ashley to understand the hidden message. Ashley's eyes immediately became more confident, as if she had just received solid backing to continue her clear, discriminatory actions toward the black man standing before her. In an instant, Michael Barrett also recognized the subtle yet powerful communication. His heart briefly tightened with a sharp pang of pain as he realized that what he was facing was not just the unprofessional attitude of a young employee, but an ingrained bias being condoned by none other than the senior manager here. The feeling of helplessness and hurt mixed within him, but Michael fought to keep his anger hidden. He stood there, composed and dignified, his eyes steady and confident but not provoking. After all, he still didn't want to believe that this was happening at Barrett Financial, the place he had poured his heart into building, hoping it would be a fair environment where people were treated based on their true worth, not the color of their skin or their appearance. Patricia Morgan stood quietly from afar, her lips curling into a faint, cold smile, almost invisible, but enough to show her complete support for Ashley's actions. Without a hint of remorse or hesitation, Patricia had chosen to stand by injustice, a choice she would later pay for in ways she could never imagine. As if to extinguish the last remnants of hope Michael had, Patricia Morgan slowly approached, her gait commanding, her sharp eyes revealing no hint of doubt. She stood straight in front of him, casually adjusting her cuff, then spoke with a tone that was polite but as cold as ice. "Sir, due to the bank's safety procedures, we require you to provide additional personal information and proof of the source of the funds you wish to withdraw." Michael felt the insult and the underlying sarcasm in each word Patricia emphasized. He met her gaze steadily, maintaining a calm yet determined demeanor, and replied softly, "I'm very familiar with the bank's procedures, but could you explain why the customer before me, the man who withdrew $20,000, was not subjected to any checks or verifications?" Patricia raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a faint, indifferent smile. Clearly, Michael's sharp and direct question had made her uncomfortable. However, Patricia quickly regained her composure and responded with a tone full of defiance. "I don't believe you have the right to question the bank's decisions, Mr. Barrett. This is a standard safety procedure, and it applies to all customers we deem to have suspicious signs." Michael furrowed his brow at her use of the term suspicious signs. It was no longer mere doubt. It had turned into a blatant insult, implicitly suggesting that he was untrustworthy simply because of his appearance and skin color. "Are you implying that I am suspicious?" Michael asked, his voice still calm but now laced with an edge. "Or is it simply because I don't look like the customer before me, the white man who left here with an even larger sum without any issues?" Patricia stepped back slightly, her icy gaze flashing with restrained anger. She was unaccustomed to being questioned, especially by customers like Michael. Patricia took a deep breath, her voice now laced with a warning and challenge. "I ask that you cooperate, Mr. Barrett. Don't turn this into a personal issue." But Michael knew this had been personal from the moment he stepped up to the counter. Patricia's words were nothing more than an excuse, a sophisticated way of covering up the painful truth that the bank he had built was tolerating racial discrimination. Michael felt a deep hurt simmering inside him, but he remained composed, determined not to let his emotions spill over at this moment. For Michael Barrett, more than anyone else, understood that this was just the beginning, and this was a fight he could not afford to lose. The atmosphere in the bank had become eerily silent, with other customers and staff beginning to glance over in curious silence, but no one dared to speak up. It seemed that Patricia had decided to give Michael no chance to resist further. With a slight nod, she signaled to Ryan Foster, the burly white security guard standing near the entrance. Ryan immediately recognized the signal, adjusted his large belt, and slowly walked toward them with a stern, cold expression. Each heavy step echoed clearly on the marble floor, like a forewarning of what was about to happen. Michael clearly noticed the menacing look Ryan was giving him, and he knew what was coming. When Ryan stood directly in front of Michael, he spoke loudly in a firm, resolute tone, without hesitation. "Sir, I need you to leave the bank immediately." Michael looked into the security guard's eyes, still maintaining his calm and polite demeanor, attempting to explain one last time. "I came here to conduct a legitimate transaction at this bank. I don't see any reason why you should ask me to leave." Ryan remained unmoved by the explanation, instead stepping closer, reducing the space between them. His voice grew even more forceful and threatening, as if trying to crush any hope of resistance from Michael. "I won't repeat myself, Mr. Barrett. Please step out of the door right now." The way Ryan directly addressed Michael by his name, clearly knowing who he was but choosing to treat him with contempt, deepened Michael's sense of insult. He scanned the bank again, noticing the customers' faces all avoiding his gaze, as if they feared being involved in the tense situation. Michael could see Patricia's eyes fixed on him now, filled with a triumphant, arrogant gleam. She was thoroughly satisfied watching the tall security guard wield power over the very man who had created the bank she worked for. This wasn't just discrimination. It was a blatant display of power meant to publicly humiliate him in the most painful way possible. Michael swallowed, trying to keep his patience and dignity, meeting Ryan's gaze one last time. His voice was gentle but resolute. "I will leave, but remember this is not the end." Ryan did not respond. Instead, he took a step back, his eyes never leaving Michael's, clearly waiting for him to walk away first. Michael slowly turned, taking deliberate steps toward the door, feeling a wave of bitterness and profound disappointment surge within him, a feeling he never imagined he would have to face, right in the bank that bore his name. As soon as Michael turned to walk out, Ryan aggressively grabbed his arm, yanking him toward the door with such force that Michael nearly lost his balance. This sudden and brutal act took place right in the middle of the bank's luxurious space, before the astonished and curious gazes of all the customers and employees witnessing the scene. Michael tried to steady himself, planting his feet firmly to avoid giving the large security guard any more reason to continue his aggressive behavior. But Ryan, seemingly indifferent, kept a tight grip on his arm, pushing him faster toward the door as if he were ejecting a criminal rather than a respected guest. When they reached the door, Ryan unexpectedly jerked the ID card Michael was holding from his hand and deliberately threw it to the ground, as though it were nothing more than a worthless piece of paper. The small card hit the glossy marble floor with a sharp clink, causing everyone watching to freeze in shock. A rush of humiliation and anger surged through Michael, now impossible to suppress. This was not just a rude action. It was a blatant insult, a public display of power from Ryan and Patricia meant to demean him cruelly. Michael slowly bent down to pick up his ID, each movement deliberate and controlled, but inside, his anger was burning fiercely. He looked up at Ryan, his gaze colder and harder than ever, as if he were engraving the face of the man who had just forced him to endure this humiliation into his memory. "What do you think you just did?" Michael spoke softly, but with great force, each word clear, cold as ice, yet full of the strength of a man not easily defeated. Ryan didn't answer. He only smirked in a cold, mocking way, folding his arms defiantly at the bank's door, clearly waiting for Michael to leave the place he had once built. Michael scanned the bank one last time. The averted gazes, the silent faces, all made him feel the deep injustice unfolding before him. His heart tightened with disappointment and frustration, realizing that the racism he had worked so hard to eradicate existed right here in the very place he had poured his soul and faith into, a place that should have been a symbol of equality and human respect. Then he stepped outside, gripping his ID tightly, as though holding on to the last shred of his dignity, telling himself that this was not the end. Michael Barrett knew that justice must be served, and those who had embarrassed him in public would sooner or later face the consequences of their actions. As Michael stepped out of the door, the bitter feeling still lingering, a figure slowly approached him from the side of the bank. It was Darius Evans, a middle-aged black security guard with a calm demeanor and a gentle face, hidden behind the weariness of life. Darius bent down, carefully picking up the ID card from the ground, brushing off the dust with great respect, and then handed it back to Michael with both hands. Michael looked up at the man before him, clearly seeing the sincerity and empathy in Darius's deep brown eyes. Unlike Ryan, who had used his power to humiliate him, Darius displayed a simple, human compassion. As Darius handed the ID card back, he slightly tilted his head toward Michael, speaking in a soft voice, just loud enough to be heard but full of genuine understanding. "Mr. Barrett, I'm truly sorry that you had to experience this, but I want you to know that how they treat us isn't anything new here. It happens far more often than many people could imagine, no matter how hard we try, no matter where we stand." Darius's voice held no anger, but the resignation and sadness buried in each word made Michael's heart ache. The racism he had just experienced today turned out to be only a small part of a much larger system of injustice that a man like Darius Evans had silently witnessed and endured for years. Michael nodded slightly, his gaze revealing a deep sense of gratitude for Darius's heart and words. He took the ID card, hesitated for a moment, and then placed his hand on Darius's shoulder, as if to say that he understood the value of what he had just heard, that he was grateful for Darius's courage in stepping forward and sharing this with him at such a moment. "Thank you, Darius," Michael said, his voice calm once more. "I won't let this be silenced. The truth must be spoken, and people like us deserve to be treated with the respect we truly deserve." Darius silently watched him, his lips curling into a slight but meaningful smile. Perhaps for the first time in many years working at Barrett Financial, Darius felt that he was not alone in the silent fight against this injustice. Michael turned his head back to look at the bank one last time, a strong sense of resolve rising within him. Darius's sincere words were a meaningful reminder. He was not just fighting for himself, but for people like Darius, those who deserved to be treated with fairness and humanity in a society that always claimed to be civilized and just. Darius's sincere words sparked a strong and resolute determination in Michael. He straightened up, regained his composure, and gripped his phone tighter than ever. He couldn't let this humiliation pass in silence. He knew exactly what he needed to do next. He quickly dialed the number. Each ring in his ear felt like a powerful nudge forward. Within seconds, the voice on the other end came through loud and clear, full of authority. "Richard Carter speaking." "Richard, I'm at the downtown branch," Michael said, maintaining control. But his voice was serious enough for Richard to immediately understand that this was no small matter. "You need to get here right now. We have an issue that needs resolving." Richard seemed to sense the tension in Michael's voice and responded briefly but confidently. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Michael stood silently in front of the bank, feeling like each passing minute stretched on forever. Finally, less than 10 minutes later, a sleek black car slowly came to a stop right in front of the bank. From the car, Richard Carter stepped out, his serious expression and commanding presence making the entire space around him seem to pause for a moment. Every eye in the bank, both staff and customers, immediately turned toward this powerful man, recognizing him instantly as the vice president of Barrett Financial. As Richard entered the main lobby, his confident and authoritative presence immediately threw Patricia and Ryan off balance. Patricia tried to maintain her cold, composed expression, but it was clear that Richard's unexpected arrival had shaken her confidence. In that moment, Richard quickly scanned the room, his sharp gaze stopping at Patricia, then Ryan, before turning toward Michael, who was standing with Darius outside. "What happened here?" Richard asked, his voice stern, commanding, and echoing throughout the bank's lobby. Without waiting for an answer, Richard walked directly toward Michael with a respectful attitude, gently placing his hand on Michael's shoulder and speaking clearly in front of everyone present. "Michael, I am deeply sorry that this has happened at our very own bank." With those words, Michael Barrett's true identity, CEO and founder of Barrett Financial, was revealed to the astonishment of all the employees and customers. A wave of whispers quickly spread through the crowd. Patricia's face turned pale, her lips trembling, while Ryan Foster suddenly lowered his head awkwardly, all traces of arrogance disappearing completely. Michael stood tall, his eyes now burning with determination as he turned toward Patricia, then calmly but firmly spoke to Richard. "It's time we make things clear here, Richard." Michael's decisive words had barely finished when Richard immediately turned to Patricia, his gaze now as sharp as a blade freshly drawn from its sheath. An absolute silence descended over the bank, with employees and customers holding their breath, tense and watching the unfolding events. "Patricia," Richard began in a low yet commanding voice, "I need you to explain right now. Why was Mr. Barrett denied service and treated so poorly at the bank he founded?" Patricia immediately lost the usual air of arrogance. She stammered, desperately searching for an explanation, but there was no justification strong enough to defend what had just happened. I was just following protocol, she fumbled, her gaze clearly avoiding Richard's. But Richard didn't give her the chance to evade responsibility. Protocol, Richard emphasized, his eyes filled with disappointment and anger. Or was it your personal bias and the staff under your command? Ashley, who was standing nearby, trembled when Richard suddenly turned his sharp gaze toward her. And you, Ashley, are you also going to explain that your actions were following protocol? Ashley's face went pale. All the confidence and coldness from before vanished, replaced by clear panic. She muttered, her voice shaking with fear. I didn't realize. You didn't realize what? Richard cut off Ashley firmly. You didn't realize that Mr. Barrett is the CEO of this bank, or you didn't realize that your own actions were blatant, shameful racism. Richard's words echoed powerfully throughout the bank, like a steel-hard accusation that could not be denied. Patricia and Ashley lost all composure, their attempts to justify themselves meaningless in the face of the truth being exposed before everyone. Richard turned to Patricia, his voice stern and decisive. I cannot accept any form of discrimination at this bank, especially not from our founder and CEO. From this moment forward, both you and Ashley are officially terminated, effective immediately. Patricia was taken aback, her eyes wide with utter shock. Ashley, standing beside her, burst into tears, covering her face with trembling hands, realizing too late the severe consequences of her own reckless actions. Richard scanned the room one last time, his gaze full of stern authority and clarity. I want everyone here to understand that Barrett Financial will never tolerate any form of discrimination or prejudice. What happened today will never be allowed to happen again. A deep silence fell over the space once more. Everyone understood clearly. Justice had been served publicly and forcefully, and from now on, Barrett Financial would no longer have room for unfair biases or those who acted on them. Immediately after the decisive announcement regarding Patricia and Ashley, Richard Carter turned his stern gaze toward Ryan Foster. The tall security guard, who had previously exuded arrogance and defiance, now seemed to shrink under the authoritative stare of the vice president. Ryan Foster. Richard's voice rang clear, still resonating but calm and sharp. Do you think you have the right to treat any customer of this bank the way you just did? Are you protecting the bank, or are you abusing your power to impose your personal prejudices? Ryan was visibly flustered, clearly not realizing that his actions had led to such serious consequences. He tried to avoid Richard's gaze, stumbling over weak excuses that he couldn't fully articulate. This is Barrett Financial, Richard continued forcefully, where every customer, regardless of their status or skin color, deserves to be treated with absolute respect. Your actions didn't just insult Mr. Barrett. They go against everything this bank stands for. Ryan lowered his head in silence, realizing that no explanation could salvage the situation. Richard took a deep breath, his gaze now sweeping across the employees who were listening intently in the lobby, and he spoke with firm seriousness. Starting tomorrow, all staff at this branch will be required to attend a mandatory training on combating prejudice and discrimination. I do not want to see any incidents like today happen again. Murmurs of quiet discussion filled the bank lobby, everyone clearly understanding the gravity of Richard's words. No one dared to oppose or show dissatisfaction, knowing that this was the necessary and urgent change. Richard then turned to Darius Evans, who was still standing beside Michael with a compassionate and composed expression. Richard's gaze softened, full of respect as he spoke, causing Darius to feel slightly surprised. "And you, Darius Evans, I have been watching your actions since you walked in here. While everyone else remained silent, you had the courage to show empathy, kindness, and true respect. You are the embodiment of what Barrett Financial strives to be." Darius stood stunned, unsure of how to respond, but Richard continued, "Because of that, I have decided to promote you. From today, you will be in charge of the security team at this branch. I trust you will ensure that nothing like today's disgrace ever happens again." Darius paused for a moment, his face showing deep emotion. He nodded gently, his eyes shining with gratitude and emotion. For the first time in many years of working there, Darius felt truly recognized in a meaningful way. Michael stood beside Darius, placing a hand on his shoulder with deep sincerity. At this moment, the positions had completely reversed. Those who had acted unjustly were exposed and punished, while those who stood for justice and humanity, like Darius, were rightfully acknowledged. The bank's atmosphere now symbolized not just the restoration of justice, but also a powerful and decisive change in respect and equality, the values that Barrett Financial had, and always would, staunchly uphold. Immediately after Richard's powerful statement, Michael calmly returned to the transaction counter, the place where not long ago he had been treated as an untrustworthy stranger. His steps were confident and composed, yet filled with inner strength and the self-assurance of a man who had reclaimed justice. The employees behind the counter now lowered their heads, avoiding his gaze, their faces clearly showing deep embarrassment and regret. No one dared show indifference or doubt toward the man standing before them, the CEO of Barrett Financial. Another female employee quickly and respectfully received Michael's request, her gaze tentative but full of respect. "Mr. Barrett, how much would you like to withdraw?" Michael smiled gently, responding clearly and politely, his voice audible but carrying an undeniable authority. "I will withdraw the same amount I requested earlier, $15,000, thank you." The stacks of cash were quickly placed on the counter, neatly arranged with the utmost care and respect. Michael calmly counted the money, neither hurried nor slow, as if to let everyone here understand that this money was always his, and he had never doubted that. After completing the transaction, Michael turned to Darius Evans, who was still standing there observing everything with his familiar calm and humility. Michael walked over, gently set aside a portion of the withdrawn money, and handed it to Darius with a warm, sincere smile. "Darius, I want you to take this money," he said gently but with determination, "and take the day off. Today you have done more than everyone else here combined. You deserve this." Darius hesitated for a moment, unaccustomed to receiving such unexpected favor, but when he looked deeply into Michael's eyes, he understood that this was not just a reward, but the deepest gratitude, a true recognition of his worth as a person. Darius accepted the money from Michael with absolute respect, his eyes filled with emotion and pride. From afar, Ryan, Patricia, and Ashley stood there, their eyes full of bitterness and defeat as they witnessed this moment. They had learned a valuable lesson about how to treat others and the importance of human respect, a lesson they would surely never forget. Michael turned and walked out of the bank once again, but this time he walked with his head held high, with no lingering doubt or hurt. Before stepping out, he stopped and glanced one last time at all the employees present in the bank lobby, then spoke clearly and firmly. "Always remember, the true worth of a person is never found in their skin color or appearance, but in how we treat one another, especially in the most difficult of times." Then he continued walking, leaving behind heads bowed in reflection, and a valuable lesson about dignity, fairness, and the rightful punishment for those who disregard the core values of respect and equality. Just as Michael was about to step through the bank doors, he suddenly stopped, feeling that there was one more important thing he needed to say. He turned around, his gaze fixed directly on Patricia Morgan, the powerful woman who, just moments ago, had stood tall, now shrinking in place, trying to hide her shame mixed with bitterness. Each of Michael's steps echoed softly yet with immense strength, causing everyone to focus on his every movement. Patricia stood frozen, her face pale, no longer carrying any confidence, waiting to see what Michael would say next. Standing before Patricia, Michael locked eyes with her, the same eyes that had once been filled with arrogance and coldness, now only showing helplessness and confusion. Michael gently tilted his head, his voice clear, each word spoken with power and dignity. "Patricia, you should have looked more closely at my ID. Remember that." Michael's words were soft, yet sharp as a knife, making Patricia flinch. She suddenly understood more clearly than ever the profound meaning behind those words. She had looked, but not truly seen. She had judged others by their appearance and biases, rather than by their dignity or true worth. Michael paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink deeply into Patricia's consciousness and into the minds of all those witnessing this event. His gaze was calm but resolute, as if carving the message into the memories of those present. Every person deserves respect, no matter who they are, where they come from, or the color of their skin. If we cannot look at people and see their true value, then we do not deserve to be in a position of power over others. The bank fell into a deep silence, filled with emotion. The employees lowered their heads in reflection, and the customers stood still, as though trying to absorb the valuable lesson they had just witnessed. Patricia remained silent, for the first time in her life realizing the painful consequences of prejudice and disrespect. Michael turned, walking out of the bank with his head held high, radiating strength and dignity. The morning sunlight illuminated his face, like a shining symbol of justice, self-respect, and resilience. He left, but the message he had left behind would remain forever. A powerful reminder of the consequences of discrimination, the value of human dignity, and the belief in justice. Behind him, Barrett Financial would never be the same. The lesson of today would become a lasting mark, forcing everyone who witnessed it to reflect on their actions, attitudes, and the way they treat each other, so they would never make the same mistake again. Today's story serves as a strong reminder of fairness, respect, and the dignity of each person in our society. Sometimes, prejudice doesn't just exist in clear actions. It also hides in the subtle thoughts we rarely recognize. The most important thing is how we choose to respond. Will we remain silent in the face of injustice, or will we rise up to protect justice, like Michael Barrett? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar situation of discrimination, and how did you react to it? Feel free to share your story in the comments below. If you found today's story meaningful, please leave a like, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to spread more valuable life lessons. Goodbye, and see you next time.